Hey everyone, I've been a long-time lurker here, but I never thought I'd be writing my own post. I'm not even sure why I'm doing this, maybe to get it all out or to see if anyone else has been through something like this. My name's Eric, and until recently, I thought my life was pretty great. I've been married to Lisa for 12 years. We have no kids, not for lack of trying, and built what I thought was a solid life together. Lisa and I met in college. She was the outgoing, charismatic type who lit up a room, while I was more of a quiet, keep-to-myself guy. Somehow, we just clicked. We married right after graduation, and for years, it felt like we were that couple everyone envied. We had the shared inside jokes, the date nights, the plans for the future, all of it. But looking back, I guess there were signs. Little cracks you don't notice when you're busy living your life. Over the last couple of years, Lisa started changing. At first, it was subtle, a new gym membership, a more intense focus on her appearance, and a sudden interest in finding herself. She said she wanted to start yoga and mindfulness retreats, so I supported her. I figured, why not? Everyone needs a hobby. Then, about 6 months ago, she began staying out later. I'd text her around 9 p.m., asking if everything was okay, and I'd get responses like, "It's just girls' night," or "We're celebrating a friend's promotion." I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, overbearing husband. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little left out. The real turning point came one random Saturday morning. Lisa sat me down and said we needed to talk. "Eric," she started, looking me in the eye, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I think we need to explore an open marriage." I just stared at her, convinced I'd misheard. "What are you saying?" I asked. She launched into a whole speech about how monogamy was unnatural, how our love would grow stronger if we could explore other connections, and how this wasn't about me not being enough, it was about her personal growth. I was floored. "Are you serious? Is there someone else?" She swore up and down that there wasn't. "This is just something I've been reading about," she said, "and I think it could be really good for us." I didn't buy it. My gut told me there was more to the story. But instead of confronting her right away, I said I needed time to process everything. What else could I do? The woman I loved just dropped a nuclear bomb on our marriage. Over the next few days, Lisa acted like everything was fine. She'd cook dinner, chat about her day, and even suggest watching a movie together. Meanwhile, I was stuck in my own head, replaying her words and trying to make sense of it all. What I didn't know then was how far this personal growth idea of hers had already gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa wasn't being completely honest with me. Something about her proposal, how casual she was about it, just didn't sit right. So, I decided to pay closer attention. Lisa's behavior grew stranger. She was on her phone constantly, texting or scrolling through social media. She started dressing differently too, more revealing, almost as if she was dressing for someone else. She'd laugh at her texts and quickly lock her phone when I walked into the room. The woman who used to share everything with me now seemed like a stranger. One night, I worked up the courage to bring it up again. "Lisa," I said as we sat at the dinner table, "I've been thinking about what you said. About an open marriage." Her eyes lit up, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be excited. "Oh," she said, setting her fork down. "What are your thoughts?" "I don't think it's a good idea," I said firmly. "I married you because I wanted to build a life with you, not share you with other people. If something's missing in our relationship, let's talk about it. But this isn't the solution." Her face fell, and then came the excuses. "Eric, it's not that I don't love you. It's just, I need more. I need to feel alive again." Alive. I repeated. "What does that even mean? We've always been happy. What's changed?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring down at her plate. The silence between us was deafening. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, trying to figure out where things went wrong. Was I not attentive enough? Did I work too much? I even started questioning if I'd somehow driven her away. But deep down, I knew this wasn't my fault. Something was going on, and I needed to find out what. A week later, I found my answer. It was a Wednesday evening, and Lisa was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up the dark bedroom. I glanced at the screen, and my stomach dropped. The notification wasn't from a friend or a group chat, it was from someone named Evan. "Can't wait to see you again," the message read, with a winking emoji. My heart started pounding. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Against my better judgment, I picked up her phone. It was locked, but she had Face ID set up, and her phone was unlocked in a split second when I aimed it at her face through the bathroom door crack. What I saw confirmed every suspicion I'd been trying to ignore. There were dozens of messages between her and Evan. Flirty messages. Explicit messages. Dates, plans, even photos. I felt sick. As I scrolled through, I realized this had been going on for months. Months. All the late nights, the girls' nights, the sudden interest in open relationships, it was all because of him. My hands shook as I put the phone back. My head was spinning. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me wanted to wait, to think it through. I needed a plan. Lisa came out of the shower moments later, wrapped in a towel, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. "What are you up to?" she asked, running a hand through her wet hair. "Just thinking," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want her to know I'd seen anything. Not yet. "About what?" she asked, her tone casual as she climbed into bed beside me. "About us," I said. It wasn't a lie. She gave me a soft smile, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "I know this is hard for you," she said, "but we'll figure it out." Her words felt like a slap in the face. The nerve of her to act like this was just a bump in the road. Like she wasn't actively betraying me behind my back. I nodded silently, knowing I couldn't let her see the storm brewing inside me. That night, as Lisa drifted off to sleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. I realized two things. First, my marriage as I knew it was over. And second, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions at work, pretending everything was fine while my mind churned with everything I discovered. At home, Lisa acted like nothing had changed. She was cheerful, humming while she cooked, chatting about her day like we were still the perfect couple. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the lies. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to do it on my terms. I wasn't going to fly off the handle. I wanted her to face the truth she'd been hiding. So I spent that weekend gathering my thoughts, rehearsing what I'd say. I even printed out screenshots of her texts with Evan as proof, just in case she tried to deny it. Sunday night, after dinner, I decided it was time. Lisa was scrolling on her phone in the living room, her legs curled up on the couch. I walked in and sat down across from her. "Lisa," I started, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." She glanced up, her face instantly wary. "What's going on?" "I need you to be honest with me," I said, leaning forward. "Is there something you want to tell me? Something about Evan?" Her face froze. For a split second, she looked genuinely startled. But then she quickly masked it, setting her phone down and crossing her arms. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and pulled out the screenshots, laying them on the coffee table between us. "I know," I said simply. "I know about him. About the texts, the photos, the lies." Her eyes darted to the papers, and the color drained from her face. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she let out a sharp breath, like a balloon deflating, and sank back against the couch. "I guess there's no point in lying now, is there?" she muttered. "No, there isn't," I replied coldly. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, staring at the papers before finally meeting my eyes. "A few months," she admitted. "But Eric, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I cut her off. "You've been cheating on me. All those nights you said you were with friends, all the excuses, it was all a lie, wasn't it?" Her defensiveness kicked in. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice rising. "I didn't go looking for this, Eric. I felt like something was missing. Like I wasn't happy anymore. So instead of talking to me, you decided to find happiness in someone else's bed?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. Lisa's eyes flashed with frustration. "Don't you dare act like this is all my fault," she snapped. "You're not perfect, Eric. You've been distant, wrapped up in your own world. I tried to talk to you, but you never listened." I stood up, my fists clenching at my sides. "You're blaming me? You're the one who stepped out of this marriage, Lisa. Not me. Don't you dare try to make me the bad guy here." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might actually cry. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. "You know what? Maybe this was inevitable," she said coldly. Maybe we've just been pretending things were fine for too long. I didn't plan for this to happen, but maybe it's for the best. I stared at her, stunned by her lack of remorse. For the best. I repeated. You've destroyed everything we built together, and you think this is for the best? She didn't respond, just looked away, as if she couldn't face what she'd done. I realized then that there was no saving this. Whatever love we'd had was gone, replaced by betrayal and bitterness. I left the room without another word, needing to put as much distance as possible between us. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt a wave of emotions, anger, sadness, and strangely relief. Because now I knew the truth. And I knew what I had to do. The day after our confrontation, Lisa acted like nothing had happened. It was almost surreal. She still made coffee, still went about her morning routine as if we hadn't just dismantled 12 years of marriage the night before. I couldn't believe her audacity, or her coldness. Meanwhile, I was barely holding it together. I called in sick to work, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus. Instead, I spent the morning researching divorce lawyers. I hated that it had come to this, but what choice did I have? Lisa had made her bed, literally, and now she had to lie in it. When Lisa came home from work that evening, I was waiting for her. We need to talk about next steps, I said as soon as she walked in. She sighed, setting her purse down. Can't this wait? It's been a long day. No, I said firmly. It can't. She sat down, clearly annoyed. Fine. What do you want to talk about? I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, watching her reaction. I'm filing for divorce. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. Divorce, she repeated. Eric, don't you think you're being a little dramatic? We've had one bad fight. Stop, I interrupted. Don't gaslight me. This isn't just one bad fight. You cheated. You lied. You disrespected everything we built together. There's no coming back from that. Lisa's expression hardened. You're really going to throw away 12 years over one mistake? She asked, her voice laced with anger. One mistake. I laughed bitterly. This wasn't a one-time thing, Lisa. This was months of sneaking around, lying to my face, and betraying me. Don't pretend this is some minor slip-up. She opened her mouth to argue, but then she stopped herself. For a moment, I thought she might finally take responsibility, but instead, she just shook her head. If that's how you feel, fine, she said. But don't expect me to go down without a fight. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had no idea what she meant, but I knew then that this divorce wasn't going to be clean or easy. Lisa wasn't the type to admit defeat, and she'd clearly decided to make this as difficult as possible. Over the next few weeks, things got ugly. Lisa refused to move out, insisting she had just as much right to the house as I did. I started sleeping in the guest room to avoid her, and the tension between us was unbearable. Every interaction felt like a battle, whether it was about who got to use the car or who bought the groceries. But the worst part was when I discovered she was still seeing Evan. One night, I came home from work to find her dressed to the nines, her perfume heavy in the air. Where are you going? I asked, even though I already knew. Out, she said simply, grabbing her purse. With him. I pressed. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said it all. Without another word, she walked out the door, leaving me standing there in disbelief. That night, I started packing her things. If she wasn't going to leave willingly, I'd do it for her. By the time she came home, well past midnight, I had a suitcase waiting by the front door. What's this? She demanded, glaring at me. You need to go, I said. Stay with Evan, stay with a friend, I don't care. But you can't stay here anymore. Lisa crossed her arms, a defiant look on her face. You can't just kick me out, Eric. This is my house too. You forfeited that right when you brought someone else into our marriage, I shot back. If you won't leave, I'll have my lawyer handle it. Her expression faltered, and for a moment, I thought she might relent. But then she grabbed the suitcase and stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Lisa surprised me by actually leaving. She didn't say where she was going, and honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet, and I finally felt like I could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. Later that day, I got a call from a mutual friend. Eric, she said hesitantly, I thought you should know. Lisa's been telling people some things about you. She's saying you were controlling, that you wouldn't let her live her life. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She's the one who cheated, I said. She's the one who destroyed our marriage. I know, the friend said quickly. But she's trying to spin it. I just thought you should be prepared. Prepared for what? I wondered. But I didn't have to wait long to find out. Within days, Lisa started posting cryptic messages on social media about toxic relationships and finally finding freedom. Friends and acquaintances started reaching out, some offering support, others asking what had happened. I wanted to defend myself, to set the record straight, but my lawyer advised against it. Keep your head down, he said. The truth will come out eventually. It was good advice, but it didn't make it any easier. I felt like I was being painted as the villain in my own story, while Lisa played the victim. But if she thought I was just going to roll over and let her rewrite history, she had another thing coming. Lisa may have left the house, but she wasn't leaving my life quietly. Over the next few weeks, her attempts to control the narrative escalated. Mutual friends were sending me screenshots of her posts and comments, where she framed herself as a victim of a stifling marriage and a husband who didn't let her be herself. It was infuriating, but I resisted the urge to respond publicly. I wasn't going to sink to her level. But then one night, I got a message that changed everything. It came from a man I didn't recognize, named Mark. "Hey Eric," it read, "you don't know me, but I think you should see this." Attached was a series of screenshots of texts between Lisa and Evan. These weren't just flirty messages like the ones I'd seen before. These were plans. Plans to move in together, to go on trips, to build a life without me in it. One message from Lisa stood out. "He's already talking to a lawyer. Don't worry though, I'll get what I'm owed. He's too much of a pushover to fight me on it." I sat there, staring at the screen, my anger boiling over. I couldn't believe the woman I'd spent 12 years with was capable of this level of manipulation. I thanked Mark for sharing the messages, then forwarded them to my lawyer immediately. "This changes everything," he said when we spoke the next morning. "If she's planning to use the divorce to take advantage of you, we'll be ready." In the meantime, I decided it was time to reclaim some control. I started going through our shared finances, looking for anything suspicious. What I found made my blood run cold. There were charges I didn't recognize, expensive dinners, hotel stays, and even flights I'd never known about. All dated over the past several months. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally, she'd been using our money to fund her affair. I documented everything and sent it to my lawyer. He assured me this would work in my favor during the divorce proceedings, but that wasn't much comfort in the moment. It felt like my entire life had been a lie. Then came the bombshell I wasn't expecting. A few days later, I got another message from Mark. This time, it wasn't just texts. It was photos. Lisa and Evan, arm in arm, in what looked like a dingy motel room. And not just that, there were also photos of them with what appeared to be bags of pills and cash spread out on the bed. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just an affair anymore, this was criminal. I didn't know how deep they were involved, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I called my lawyer again, and he advised me to report what I'd seen to the police. "You don't want any part of this tied back to you," he said. "If she's involved in illegal activity, you need to protect yourself." Reluctantly, I went to the police station that afternoon. I handed over the photos and explained everything I knew. The officer I spoke to seemed skeptical at first, but as I laid out the timeline and the evidence, his expression shifted. "We'll look into it," he said, taking my contact information. I left the station feeling drained but determined. Lisa had taken so much from me already. My trust, my stability, my peace of mind. I wasn't going to let her drag me down any further. About a week later, I got a call from the police. They'd raided Evan's apartment and found drugs, cash, and more evidence linking both him and Lisa to a small-scale trafficking operation. Lisa had been arrested. Hearing those words felt surreal. This was the woman I once thought I'd grow old with, and now she was in handcuffs. Part of me felt vindicated, like the universe was finally holding her accountable. But another part of me just felt sad. Sad for the woman she used to be, for the life we could have had if she hadn't chosen this path. When I told my lawyer about Lisa's arrest, he was calm but firm. "This is going to work in your favor," he said. "Her criminal record will make it difficult for her to claim any significant assets in the divorce. You've got the upper hand now." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this nightmare was finally coming to an end. Lisa's arrest made waves, not just in her social circle but in ours as well. Word spread quickly, and suddenly, people who had bought into her victim narrative were distancing themselves. A mutual friend texted me, "Eric, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what she put you through." It was satisfying, but also exhausting. I didn't want sympathy, I just wanted to move on. In the days following her arrest, Lisa called me multiple times from jail. I ignored the first few, but curiosity got the better of me. When I finally answered, her voice was frantic. "Eric, please," she said, her tone almost pleading. "You have to help me. This isn't what it looks like. Isn't it?" I asked coldly. "You lied to me for months. You drained our accounts. And now you expect me to save you." "I made a mistake," she said. "Evan, he dragged me into this. I didn't know what I was getting into." I didn't believe her. "Lisa, I already filed for divorce. I'm done. Whatever mess you've made, you can deal with it on your own." Her voice cracked. "Eric, I'm sorry. But I hung up before she could finish. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore." The court proceedings started moving faster after her arrest. With her legal troubles piling up, Lisa had no leverage in the divorce. She was forced to sign an agreement that left me with the house, most of our savings, and no spousal support obligations. My lawyer called it a win, but it didn't feel like one. It was just the scraps of a life I thought I'd built with someone I could trust. Not long after the divorce was finalized, I heard through the grapevine that Lisa and Evan had both been convicted. She'd taken a plea deal to avoid a harsher sentence, but was still facing several years in prison. The finality of it hit me hard. This was a woman I'd once loved more than anything, now reduced to mugshots and court transcripts. But as much as it hurt, I knew it was time to move forward. I changed the locks, redecorated the house, and focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but with each step, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. For the first time in months, I could see a future without her, and it didn't look so bad. With Lisa out of the picture, I focused on regaining some sense of normalcy. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects to keep my mind busy. I even started hitting the gym again, something I'd neglected during the chaos of the past year. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding. One of the hardest parts, though, was the silence. For years, I'd been used to coming home to someone. Now the house felt too big, too quiet. I didn't want to wallow in it, so I started reaching out to friends I'd neglected during my marriage. It wasn't easy. Some friendships had faded, others had been influenced by Lisa's lies, but a few people stood by me. One night, I grabbed drinks with my old college buddy Matt. He'd always been brutally honest, and I needed that now. After a couple of beers, he finally said, "Man, I don't know how you stayed so calm. If I found out my wife was sneaking around, I'd have lost it." "I wasn't calm," I admitted. I don't know. I guess I shut down. What was the point of yelling when she wasn't even sorry?" Matt shook his head. "She's in prison now. Karma did the work for you." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "Yeah, I guess it did." A few weeks later, I decided to try something new, a local hiking group. It felt strange to put myself out there, but I figured it was better than sitting at home. On my first outing, I met people who seemed genuinely happy just to connect with nature and each other. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of my past with me. One person in particular stood out, a woman named Rachel. She was quiet but kind, with a sense of humor that caught me off guard. We ended up walking together most of the trail, talking about everything from our favorite books to the best places to grab coffee in town. It was refreshing to talk to someone with no baggage between us. When the hike ended, she smiled and said, "I hope you'll come to the next one." I nodded, surprised by how much I meant it when I said, "I think I will." As I drove home that evening, I realized something. For the first time since Lisa's betrayal, I felt hopeful. Not just about meeting someone new, but about my ability to rebuild, to move forward. Lisa's choices no longer defined me. They were just a chapter one was finally ready to close. Joining the hiking group became a regular thing. It wasn't just about Rachel, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look forward to seeing her. It was the sense of community, the fresh air, and the simplicity of walking through the woods without a care for what was behind me. Rachel and I started talking more outside the group. Texts here, a coffee meetup there. She wasn't pushy or invasive, which I appreciated. I think she sensed I was still finding my footing. One evening, after a group hike, she asked if I wanted to grab dinner. We ended up at this little Mexican place tucked away in the corner of town. Over chips and salsa, I found myself opening up about my past, something I hadn't done with anyone outside of my lawyer or a few close friends. I didn't know who I was anymore, I told her, fiddling with my glass of water. I built my whole life around Lisa, and when that fell apart, I realized I hadn't left anything for myself. Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's the hard part, isn't it? Realizing how much you gave up. But the good news is, you get to start fresh. Build something just for you. Her words stuck with me. It was a perspective I hadn't considered before. Maybe this wasn't just the end of something, it was the beginning of something better. Meanwhile, Lisa's situation continued to ripple through the small circles we used to share. Some mutual friends, at least the ones I still spoke to, updated me on her life behind bars. She'd been sentenced to 4 years for her role in the trafficking operation. Apparently, Evan had turned on her in exchange for a lighter sentence. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt numb. Lisa was a shadow of my past now, and every update felt like a fading echo. I didn't want to carry her mistakes with me any longer. One day, I got a letter from Lisa. It was unexpected, especially since I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. For a long while, I debated whether to even open it. Curiosity won out, and I tore it open. The letter was a mix of apologies and excuses. She wrote about how she regretted everything, how Evan had manipulated her, and how prison had given her time to reflect. There was one line that stuck out. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you can understand why I did what I did. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, unsure what to feel. Forgiveness? Understanding? I didn't think I owed her either. But I also realized I wasn't angry anymore. Lisa's choices had destroyed our marriage, but they didn't have to destroy me. I never responded to the letter. A few weeks later, Rachel and I went on another hike, just the two of us this time. As we reached the top of a hill overlooking a valley, she turned to me and said, "You know, you've come a long way since I met you. You're lighter now, happier." I smiled, realizing she was right. "I think I finally stopped looking back," I said. We stood there for a moment, taking in the view, before she reached for my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a step toward something new. Rachel and I started spending more time together, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could just be myself. She didn't press me about my past, and when it did come up, she listened without judgment. It felt easy, which was something I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, after dinner at her place, we sat on her porch watching the sunset. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know you don't have to be defined by what happened, right? It's just a chapter, not the whole book." I nodded, her words sinking in. She was right. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on or the guy whose ex ended up in prison. I was Eric, rebuilding his life, one step at a time. That weekend, I cleared out the last of Lisa's things from the house. It was cathartic in a way I didn't expect. Old photos, her books, the trinkets she'd left behind. I packed them all into boxes and dropped them off at a storage facility. When I got back, I took a deep breath, looking around the house. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like mine again. Rachel came over later that evening, and we celebrated with a quiet dinner. She didn't need to say anything, just being there was enough. Life wasn't perfect, but it was starting to feel like mine again. The scars were still there, but they weren't weighing me down anymore. I was finally ready to move forward. As the weeks went by, my life started to feel like it was my own again. Work was steady, my house finally felt like home, and Rachel and I were slowly building something meaningful. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was thoughtful, easy, and exactly what I needed. One afternoon, we were walking through a local park when Rachel paused by a bench and turned to me. "You've come so far, Eric," she said. "I hope you realize that." I smiled, a genuine one. "Thanks, Rachel. I don't think I could have done it without you." Her cheeks flushed, but she just laughed. "Oh please. You did the hard part, you chose to keep going." She was right. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined feeling this free, this light. But here I was, standing in the middle of a park on a sunny day, realizing that life really does move forward if you let it. The final loose end came when I got another letter from Lisa, months after the first. This one was shorter, an apology plain and simple. No excuses, no explanations. Just a handwritten, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find happiness." I folded the letter and set it aside. I didn't feel the need to respond, but for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I wasn't sure if it was forgiveness, but it felt like closure. Rachel and I kept things simple: hikes, quiet dinners, and weekends spent exploring little spots around town. One evening she stayed over, and as we sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, I realized something. I was happy. Not just getting by or moving on. Truly happy. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. With every passing week, my old life felt further away. The anger, betrayal, and heartbreak that had consumed me were starting to feel like a distant memory. I wasn't naive. I knew I'd carry those scars forever, but they no longer felt like the defining parts of my story. Rachel had become a steady presence in my life, and I didn't take that for granted. She brought warmth into my days, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. We didn't rush anything, but we also didn't hold back when it felt right to take the next step. One Saturday, I invited her over for dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just pasta and a bottle of wine, but it felt special. Halfway through the meal, she asked, "Do you ever think about what's next? Like what you want from life now that everything's different?" I set my fork down, thinking for a moment. "I don't know," I admitted. "For so long, my whole world revolved around someone else. I guess now I'm figuring out what my world looks like on its own." She nodded, her expression understanding. "That's fair. It's a lot to process. But," I added, meeting her eyes, "I do know one thing. I want to keep building something good. Something solid." Her smile was soft but steady. "I think you're on the right track." That night, as Rachel dozed off on the couch, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. Just a year ago, I was barely holding it together, consumed by anger and loss. Now I was sitting in a home that felt like mine again, next to a woman who didn't just support me but helped me see the best in myself. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a good one. The last piece of my past fell into place a few weeks later. I got a call from Lisa's lawyer. She was officially moving forward with her plea deal and wanted no further contact between us. The relief I felt was immediate. No more letters, no more loose ends. It was over. That weekend, Rachel and I went hiking, just the two of us. As we reached a clearing overlooking a lake, she stopped and turned to me. "You know, I've never seen you this relaxed," she said, brushing a leaf off my jacket. "It looks good on you." I laughed, feeling the truth in her words. "It feels good too. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." We stood there for a moment, the breeze rustling the trees around us, and I realized something. Lisa's betrayal didn't define me. It had shaped me, sure, but it wasn't my whole story. My life was mine to rebuild, and I was doing it one step at a time. Rachel reached for my hand, and as we walked back down the trail together, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. As the months rolled on, the pieces of my new life began to settle into place. Rachel and I were growing closer, but in a way that felt natural. No pressure, no rushing. I started finding joy in the small things again, waking up early to make coffee, repainting the guest room, and finally tackling the garden that Lisa had always insisted we hire someone to manage. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about reclaiming the life I wanted to live. One evening, Rachel invited me to meet her friends. It was a casual gathering at a brewery, but I'll admit I was nervous. What if I didn't fit in? What if they asked about my past? As it turned out, I had nothing to worry about. Her friends were warm, welcoming, and full of stories about Rachel that had us both laughing. At one point, her best friend, Claire, pulled me aside. "You've been good for her," Claire said, smiling. "She's happier these days." "Funny," I replied. I was about to say the same thing about her. Rachel caught my eye from across the room and grinned. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a milestone, proof that I was moving forward, not just surviving. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected package. It was from Lisa's parents. Inside was a small box of keepsakes, photos of happier times, a few books we'd bought together, and a handwritten note from her mother. "Eric, we're sorry for everything. You deserved better, and we're grateful for how you loved our daughter when she was at her best. Wishing you all the happiness in the world." It was bittersweet. I didn't want to dwell on the past, but their words reminded me that not everything about my marriage had been bad. There were good memories too, and it was okay to carry those without carrying the pain. I decided to put the box away, not to forget it, but to remind myself how far I'd come. One night, Rachel and I were sitting on my porch, a quiet summer evening stretching out before us. She leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I think you're finally free." I didn't reply right away, but I knew she was right. For the first time in years, I felt like my life wasn't defined by what I'd lost, but by what I was building. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am." As we sat there, the weight of the past felt lighter than ever. I wasn't running from it anymore, I was just moving forward. Months turned into a year, and for the first time in a long while, my life felt stable, peaceful even. The house had undergone subtle changes: new curtains in the living room, a fresh coat of paint in the bedroom, and Rachel's jacket hanging on the coat rack more often than not. She wasn't living with me, and we hadn't even talked about it yet, but her presence in my life had become something I treasured. It wasn't overwhelming or rushed, it just felt like she belonged. One Saturday, Rachel invited me to a charity event she was involved in. She was passionate about volunteering, something I'd always admired but never really done myself. The event was a community cleanup, and we spent the morning picking up trash along the riverbank. As we worked, Rachel nudged me with her elbow. "You know," she said, grinning, "you're not half bad at this." "Don't get used to it," I joked, wiping sweat from my brow. "I might need some convincing to make this a habit." "Challenge accepted," she said with a laugh. By the end of the day, I realized something unexpected. I actually enjoyed it. There was something rewarding about doing something good for the community, and sharing that experience with Rachel made it even better. Later that evening, as we sat on my porch drinking iced tea, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Eric, do you ever think about what you want next? Not just for now but like long term?" The question caught me off guard. For so long, I'd avoided looking too far ahead, afraid of what I might see. But now I felt ready. "I think I want what everyone wants," I said after a moment. "A home, happiness, someone to share it with. A clean slate." She smiled, her hand brushing mine. "You've already started, you know. You've got the slate, and you're filling it with all the right things." Her words stayed with me long after she left that night. The next week, I went back to the community cleanup site on my own, surprising even myself. As I worked, I realized that Rachel was right. I was building something new. It wasn't about erasing the past, but adding new chapters to my story. When I got home, I called Rachel. "Hey," I said, smiling into the phone, "I think you might have just turned me into a volunteer." She laughed, a sound that felt like sunshine. "Told you I'd win you over." And just like that, life kept moving forward, one step at a time. Rachel and I grew closer with each passing week, but it still felt natural, not rushed, not forced. One Friday night, we found ourselves at a local jazz bar, sipping drinks while a live band played. She loved jazz, and I was learning to appreciate it. Watching her tap her foot to the rhythm, her eyes lighting up with every note, I realized how much joy she brought into my life. When we stepped outside into the cool night air, she turned to me. "Eric, I need to ask you something," she said, her tone a mix of curiosity and seriousness. "Sure," I said, a little nervous. "Are you happy?" The question hit me harder than I expected. A year ago, I wouldn't have hesitated to say no. But now? I thought about everything: my rebuilt life, my newfound sense of peace, and the woman standing in front of me. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I am." She grinned back. "Good. Because I am too." The next day, I got a call from an old friend who'd heard about my new relationship. "I can't believe you're dating already," he said, his tone skeptical. "Why not?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It just seems fast given everything with Lisa." I thought about it for a moment before answering. "It might seem fast to you, but I'm not rushing anything. Rachel's not a rebound, she's a fresh start." He didn't have much to say after that, but the conversation stuck with me. It reminded me that some people would always see me as the guy who was cheated on, as if that defined me forever. But I wasn't that guy anymore. Later that week, Rachel and I went for a hike, something we hadn't done in a while. As we reached a quiet spot by a stream, she sat down on a rock and looked at me. "You've been quiet today," she said. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside her. "I've been thinking about how far I've come, and how far I want to go. For a long time, I felt like I was stuck, like my life was just this broken thing I'd never fix. But now I feel like I can finally see the future again. She reached for my hand, her touch grounding me. What do you see? I turned to her, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I see this, I said simply. Us. A life that's mine to rebuild, with someone who makes it better. Her smile was soft but filled with something deeper, understanding, maybe even love. That evening, as I sat at home reflecting on the day, I realized something important. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It moves on, whether you're holding on to the past or not. And for the first time, I wasn't holding on anymore. I was finally ready to let go, and to see where the path ahead might lead. A year and a half after my world fell apart, I stood in the middle of my yard, planting a tree. It wasn't anything dramatic, a simple cherry blossom Rachel had picked out, but it felt symbolic. Planting something new, nurturing it, watching it grow. A reminder that life moves forward, no matter what. Rachel was nearby, sitting on the porch with a book in her lap. She glanced up occasionally, smiling as I wrestled with the stubborn soil. It was a quiet afternoon, but those were becoming my favorite kind. A few weeks later, Rachel and I went to a dinner hosted by my close friends, Matt and his wife Lauren. They'd been my sounding boards throughout everything with Lisa, and this was their way of celebrating the new chapter in my life. As we sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, Matt raised his glass. To Eric, he said, for proving that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's just making room for something better. The toast caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt a lump in my throat. I glanced at Rachel, who gave me a small nod, as if to say, "You deserve this." To new beginnings, I said, raising my own glass. The next weekend, Rachel and I hiked up to the spot overlooking the valley, the same one where I'd realized I was ready to move forward. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the sound of rustling leaves. As we stood there, I turned to Rachel. "You've changed my life," I said softly. She smiled, slipping her hand into mine. "And you've shown me that second chances aren't just for romance. They're for life too." We stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Looking back now, I can honestly say I'm grateful for everything I've been through. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because it showed me who I am and what I'm capable of. Lisa's betrayal, her lies, even her downfall, they were all part of a story I thought would define me forever. But they didn't. They were just a chapter. Rachel and I aren't rushing into anything, but I know she's part of the next chapter of my life. She's taught me to see the good in myself again, to embrace the quiet moments, and to trust that life has more to offer. The cherry blossom tree is thriving now, its roots settling into the soil, its branches reaching for the sky. And just like that tree, I'm growing too. This isn't the end of my story, it's the beginning of a new one.